Keir Starmer, the UK's newly minted Prime Minister, sparked nothing short of an international spectacle with a jaw-dropping promise at the COP29 conference in Baku, Azerbaijan. In front of an audience of world leaders, Starmer vowed to reduce Britain's carbon emissions by an extraordinary 81% by 2035. But back at home, the reaction was far from supportive. GB News commentator Piers Pottinger unleashed a tirade, laughing off Starmer's pledge as the funniest thing I've heard in years, calling the entire agenda a fantasy designed to court international favour while ignoring the harsh realities faced by the British public. Meanwhile, Starmer's staunch supporter, Nigel Nelson, fought tooth and nail to defend his leader's goals, arguing that the UK's climate plans were about backing Britain on the world stage. The scene set off a firestorm, with critics and supporters clashing over whether Starmer's environmental ambitions are forward-thinking leadership or a reckless gamble that threatens Britain's economic future. Hold on to your hats, because in the past 24 hours, the drama has only intensified. Fresh details have emerged from inside the Labour Party and British business sectors that cast even more doubt on Starmer's bold promises. And there's breaking news that major energy corporations might be plotting a counter-campaign against the government's climate policies, which they believe could destabilise their industries and drive up prices for everyday Britons. If you're wondering what Britain's climate future might actually look like, stick around as we dive into every shocking twist of this unfolding political thriller. As he stood at the podium in Baku, Azerbaijan, for the COP29 climate conference, Prime Minister Keir Starmer wore the look of a man on a mission. His promise to reduce the UK's carbon emissions by a staggering 81% by 2035 was met with applause by some international leaders, who lauded the Labour Prime Minister for his ambitious environmental goals. Starmer claimed that Britain would rise to the climate challenge, painting a picture of a green future where the UK would lead the world in clean energy. The climate challenge is something we have got to rise to, and that's why I've repeatedly said we've got to show leadership, he declared, suggesting that Britain would soon become a clean energy superpower. Yet back home, the reaction was one of stunned disbelief. GB News aired a fierce debate following Starmer's speech, and political commentator Piers Pottinger wasted no time in tearing into Starmer's words. With a laugh that dripped with sarcasm, Pottinger called the Prime Minister's plan the funniest thing I've heard in years, accusing him of being completely out of touch with reality. It seems he loves going to these international conferences and talking about subjects that 95% of the people back home couldn't care less about, Pottinger scoffed. He argued that Starmer's climate goals were a dangerous illusion, a ploy to build Britain's image abroad while ignoring the severe repercussions that such drastic policies could have on everyday Britons. Pottinger's points didn't end there. He pointed out a striking irony. While Starmer was boasting about clean energy in Baku, Shell, Britain's biggest energy company, had just secured a major legal victory in the Dutch courts, winning its appeal against strict emissions regulations. For Pottinger, the timing was a cruelly ironic twist, proof that Starmer's climate goals are detached from the economic realities facing British companies. Shell's win in the courts shows just how out of touch Starmer is, Pottinger insisted. He's making promises that sound good on paper, but could devastate our industries and cost thousands of jobs. However, Nigel Nelson, a steadfast defender of Starmer and Labour's climate agenda, fought back against Pottinger's scorn. According to Nelson, Starmer was doing exactly what Britain needs, taking decisive action on the climate crisis and seizing the chance to be a global leader. What he's there to do is back Britain, to support Britain and promote Britain, Nelson argued. He claimed that Starmer's vision was one of economic foresight, a future in which Britain would lead the world in renewable energy technology, bringing in revenue instead of being left behind to buy expensive green technologies from other countries. Who is Starmer promoting Britain to? Pottinger interjected mockingly, questioning Nelson's idealism. If you think we're going to sell our way out of this mess by selling windmills to other countries, I have a bridge to sell you. Pottinger's cynicism underscored a broader sentiment within Britain, a deep-rooted fear that the climate promises were empty words masking dangerous economic experiments. The tension between Pottinger's pragmatism and Nelson's optimism captured a larger, nationwide debate. Britons are caught in a divide between wanting a cleaner, greener future and fearing the economic repercussions of transitioning too quickly. Pottinger, doubling down, blasted Labour's choice of Energy Secretary Ed Miliband as an ill-suited figure to oversee such a monumental project. With Miliband at the helm, all we'll see are more fanciful ideas with zero practicality. He makes speeches about green jobs, but where are they? Where's the roadmap? As the discussion raged on, it became clear that Pottinger's skepticism was hitting home with many who are frustrated by the economic strain already impacting the UK. Pottinger argued that the Labour government's ambitious emissions target was yet another example of the public sector leading the nation down an unsustainable path, leaving those in private industry to shoulder the burdens of higher costs, looming job cuts, and restricted business growth. Unless you're part of the public sector bubble, Pottinger seethed, this government doesn't care about you. He accused Starmer of sacrificing the private sector for what he called an international image campaign, claiming that Starmer's true motives were to polish Britain's reputation on the world stage rather than improve the lives of its citizens. He's causing irreparable damage to this country, Pottinger said, making a dire warning that Labour's policies would ultimately backfire, resulting in no growth, no jobs, and a weakened economy. Even as Nelson defended Starmer's vision as a necessary and forward-thinking plan for a green economy, Pottinger continued his scathing attack, suggesting that Labour's climate agenda was little more than a fantasy at best and a nightmare for average Britons at worst. And with every dismissive laugh from Pottinger, Nelson's defence appeared increasingly fragile. Polls reveal that a growing number of Britons are questioning if the Labour government's climate commitments might lead to unmanageable costs, fuel shortages, and an economic downturn that could last a generation. Adding to the frenzy, energy industry leaders have voiced concerns over Labour's emissions targets, claiming that the UK lacks the necessary infrastructure, funding, and technological capacity to meet such ambitious goals without devastating the country's economy. Reports surfaced suggesting that top energy corporations may be exploring a counter-campaign to push back against the government's climate policies, which they argue would wreak havoc on prices and supply chains, further squeezing the pockets of everyday citizens. Who will pay the price for all this? Asked Pottinger. The ordinary Briton, already drowning in high energy bills with no guarantee of jobs or stability. The COP29 scandal has thrust Labour's climate agenda into a firestorm, exposing rifts not only between parties but also within Labour itself. Some moderate voices within the party are beginning to break ranks, worried that Starmer's overzealous climate ambitions could alienate voters who are more concerned with economic survival than global reputation. Labour's flagship climate commitment, once a symbol of progressive leadership, is now morphing into a scandal, with critics labelling it a reckless gamble and supporters doubling down on its promise of economic revitalisation. The stakes couldn't be higher for Starmer, who must now grapple with both domestic backlash and wavering support from his own party. And as Pottinger warned, if the UK can't meet these climate targets without sacrificing stability and prosperity, then Labour's climate agenda might just become the undoing of his premiership.